Hello, everyone. My name is Amy Wolf, and I'm the programming coordinator for the Osterville Village Library. Thank you so much for joining us today. And to our friends joining us on Zoom, thank you for being here as well. Today, we have the honor of hosting Don DeChristofaro. Don has been a paranormal investigator for over 20 years. As a member of the Greater Boston Paranormal Associates, he facilitates paranormal investigations, tours, and events aboard the USS Salem in Quincy, Mass. Once a World War II heavy cruiser, the USS Salem is now home to the United States Naval Shipbuilding Museum, and she's also considered to be one of the most actively haunted locations in New England. Don's expertise on the USS Salem goes far beyond the hauntings within her. Having long been fascinated by this historic ship, Don has extensive knowledge of her history and the many adventures she's been on, from her creation to her transformation into a museum. And before I say without further ado, I also want to add that Don has been to many historical haunted places in New England and beyond, I'm sure. And he is willing to go beyond just talking about the USS Salem and talk about more haunted places. So without further ado, Don DeChristofaro.
I told Amy that, so the presentation you're gonna see today is just kind of an umbrella over what we do. One of these days, if you like, I'll come back. I have a presentation that is what I call Salem centric. And I enjoy giving that one because, you know, there are groups like ours all over the country, 1,000 groups like ours. And I don't believe anybody in the country is doing the work that we're doing aboard Salem. I'll show you a little bit of it, but I get into it extensively and maybe we can do that another time.
Absolutely.
Before we go any further, Sandra Morgan is here. Sandra's part of the GBPA. Sandra and I also have a podcast, Observations from the Road Less Traveled, that you can get pretty much anywhere that is not paranormal. So yeah, we are members of an organization called the Greater Boston Paranormal Associates. There you go. Yep, GBPA, this is our logo, as you can see. At the top, there's a 139, which is kind of an homage to our home away from home, CA 139, USS Salem. And our motto, Mortuus Vivere, or the dead live. Down at the bottom, these are words we live by. I think our team, as I said, there are thousands of teams like ours all over the country. Some are good, some are bad, some are pros, some are clowns, just like everything else, I guess. But I think our team is a little bit different because, you know, we're comprised of a lot of different people who see these things from a lot of different angles. We have devout believers. We have some very ardent skeptics. We have some people who are past life regressives, who are very into past life regressionism and approach a lot of these things that way. We have a number of people, Sandra is one of them, who are sensitives. We have people like myself who are insensitive. And you know, I think that's the only way a team that does what we do can function the right way, because I really think it's the only way that you can see every possibility as you walk into a situation. Our approach, and this comes primarily from the Salem, but it's everywhere. The entities that we deal with, we approach them with respect in all cases. They're the same people they were before they crossed, and there's no reason to treat them with any less respect than you would if you met them on the street. You can't expect them to perform like trained SEALs. They're gonna do what they're gonna do, just like people have a tendency to do. Sometimes they're gonna be a little bit more cooperative than others. But that's cool, that's them, and we deal with them, they don't deal with us, and that's the way we approach it. Last but definitely not least, you know, we go on the road, we go on a lot of road trips together, and we always have a blast everywhere we go. And when that's not happening anymore, that'll be the time to give it up. So we got some pictures. As you can see, we're a very fun group. That's not us. This is us. And as you can tell by our serious demeanor, we are standing on the porch of what I think most people who do what we do would tell you is the most haunted house in America.
Wow.
This is the Sallie House in Atchison, Kansas. We have another picture from the Sallie House that is from the morning after we spent the night, and I promise you, we are a little bit more dour than we are in this particular picture. So you may have, do any of you folks watch any of the shows on TV, any of the ghost shows, right? The travel or ghost hunting channel, I guess they should call it, right? So we've done a number of those shows, Most Terrifying Places, Kindred Spirits, Ghost Hunters, you know, we've done a lot of those shows. We've been on Chronicle, WBZ, Channel 4 has been to the ship. We do a lot of radio. We're very tight with the folks at WMEX, so we're kind of semi-regular on WMEX. The Ledger, Patriot Ledger, and Local have done pieces on the ship. I'm very friendly with a guy by the name of Jason Hawes, and if you guys watch the shows, then you know Jason is the original TV ghost hunter. When he first came to the ship, I told the gang that he is to ghost hunting what Hugh Hefner is to nudie magazines. He basically, you know, before Jason came around, people didn't even know that this stuff actually existed, that people actually did this stuff on a regular basis. And he's been on TV for about 25 years. And I often joke with him that in one afternoon, we had a bigger audience than he probably has had in all of his 25 years on television combined. When ESPN reached out to us and told us that the football coach at UConn was living in a house on campus he believed was haunted.
Oh.
So we went down and we spent an evening there, 3 or 4 hours, I'm gonna say. And they featured our investigation on ESPN's College Game Day on the Saturday before Halloween. So my wager is that we had a pretty big audience that day. So we've been around, you know, being on TV and stuff. Unfortunately, there are a lot of people now who do what we do, and that's the whole reason they do it. With us, I think it's safe to say that those opportunities have come our way. We certainly haven't gone out looking for any of them. But I think part of it is that, you know, you look at Son and I, and we're just regular people. We don't walk around wearing capes and big floppy black hats and eyeshadow and shit like that. We just kind of do our thing. And I think that appeals to a lot of people. So before we get into the things we do, we want to talk about some of the equipment. And I brought a small selection of it here, and I won't go through all of it, just a few of them. But before we do that, I want to talk about electromagnetic fields. Because the vast majority of equipment we use is based on electromagnetic fields. And my guess is if you were to ask 20 ghost hunters what an electromagnetic field is, you'd get about 18 different answers and 16 of them would be wrong. So very briefly, you know, an electromagnetic field is a field that surrounds and interacts with any object that has an electric charge or is moving, creating friction or static. The name itself tells you that it has an electric and a magnetic component. It generally transmits as a light wave. Like everything else, it can vary in strength and frequency, measured on a spectrum, as you might expect. All living organisms produce electromagnetic fields, including humans. Most of our equipment isn't sensitive enough to pick up our electromagnetic fields. But as a result of that, and as a result of the sensitivity of a lot of our equipment, when we go to a new location, when we leave here, we're headed up to the Revere Historical Society to do an investigation in that building. When we go to a new building, the first thing we do is we take a laser thermometer and an electromagnetic field detector, and we take background readings throughout the whole location. And what that does for us is, later on in the evening, as we're doing the investigation, when we're in a room, we start getting EMF spikes. We already know whether there's anything in that room that was already going to produce that spike, or whether it's something that we might want to take a closer look at because it's something a little bit out of the ordinary. So having said that, Again, for those of you who've seen any of the shows or any of that stuff, this is a K2 meter. Back when I first started, this was the go-to piece of equipment. You weren't a ghost hunter unless you had your own K2 meter. It is an electromagnetic field detector, except, ooh, it's got lights. People love lights. The newer ones make noises, click, 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 like a Geiger. And as I said, it's an electromagnetic field detector. That's all. One of the things about our field, and I'll show you another example a little bit later on, is that at some point, the guy who sells K2 meters realizes he sold about all the K2 meters he's gonna sell. And what that means, he's gotta come up with something more expensive, more advanced. And in the case of the K2 meter, they came up with the Parallel. Okay? It's the same thing. In fairness, I love the Paralight because it's nowhere near as sensitive as a lot of our other instruments. So when we go someplace, if the Paralight is going off, then we got a pretty good idea that something is going on. Obviously, it doesn't tell us that for sure, but it gives us a pretty good idea that we want to spend a little more time in the area. The biggest difference between the K2 and this is that the K2 is about $45 and this is about $250. Kind of the new go-to instrument in the paranormal field is a REM pod. It is also basically an EMF detector. It is sensitive enough to pick up human electromagnetic fields, so you kind of have to stay away from it once you set it. The other difference between this and a lot of other electromagnetic field detectors is this device produces its own electromagnetic field. So not only is it measuring something external, but the delta between its own field and something that might be external. It also has a temperature indicator that's sort of a pain. One of the few pieces of equipment we use that I think from the standpoint of thought process behind it makes complete sense is a static pod. And what this does, it's not going to do it now. What this does is measure static electricity. These lights around it are all different colors and it's direction. So that when it picks up something over here, then a little blue light is going to light up in that direction. And what's cool about it is oftentimes it moves right around the device. The reason I say the thought process makes sense is that the thinking here is that anything that moves creates friction, even in the air, of course. And friction creates static electricity. And the thinking is that an entity moving through our plane, even though you can't see it, is still going to create that friction and that static. And that's what this measures. When we go into a new location or a room, Sandra, right, this is usually the first. This is usually the first thing that gives us an indication that there may be something going on. A lot of times, spend a lot of time sitting in the dark. And the problem with a lot of the things we see is that basically it's just something darker than the dark. And the best way to see that, unfortunately, the range is great, is a laser grid. And what this does basically is, even though what you're seeing is only a shadow, nevertheless, something going in front of it is gonna disrupt the grid. And it's a great way to see things that you normally wouldn't be able to see, because as I said, it's just a darker spot on the wall in a dark room, and it's easy to miss. I just bought this because my old one broke. This is a very simple motion sensor.
Hello, welcome.
And it welcomes something coming into the room. I like my old one better because it played The Exorcist. But it stopped working, so I just bought this one. So another example of when I talk about the discrepancy between the dollars that you could spend doing this stuff Something that's real big in our field now is FLIR, forward-looking infrared. Basically, it's a heat sensor. And you can buy an actual FLIR camera. FLIR, along with being the acronym, it's also the prominent company in the field. You can buy a FLIR camera that records audio, records video and still photos. You can spend $8,000 or $9,000 on a FLIR. I have this. It attaches to my cell phone. And it's pretty good, records video and still photos. It's got a decent range. It was about $350. As opposed to this, which other than the fact that the range isn't quite as good, it's just about as good as my FLIR. And I don't know how much this cost, but one of my kids put it in my Christmas stocking a couple of years ago, so I'm gonna guess that it wasn't $350. I could be wrong, but I'm not. So this is a pretty good example of, you can spend, you can be frugal and spend money on just what you need, or you can go nuts and frankly, I think the way we look at it is, it's all about how you do your business. You know what I mean? Buying the best equipment in the world doesn't make you a better ghost hunter, not really. The last thing is this, and I hate these. This is a spirit box. And what it does is it scans radio frequencies. You can set it to scan AM or FM or both. You can set the scan speed. And the thought process here is that much like a painter needs a canvas, an entity may need a medium on which to manifest. And some say that the best medium is white noise. So a lot of people use these. Personally, I think it's one of those things, when it's great, it's great. When it says something, sometimes it says something that just floors you.
Or said your name.
Or says your name, or yeah.
Wow.
We were at the Sallie House, and what did it say? Sandra dies tonight?
Sandra died.
Yeah, Sandra died. Now, obviously, it's not always accurate, because Sandra did, yeah.
I did get COVID.
So one of the things we do that is kind of interesting is we do these things called SD sessions. And what that means is you take one of these devices, and there are a million different kinds of devices. A lot of them are phone apps. And you use headphones and a blindfold. And you put a person like in that room, for instance. Everybody else is in another room, and we're all asking questions. And the thought process is that that person is yelling out whatever they hear from this. The thinking is to see if they answer the questions without hearing the question. And those sessions have been pretty good on it. I'm not a fan of these devices really for no other reason than I like quiet. What we do is great when it's quiet. I don't like the white noise. It's too much noise for me. So I want to show you a little video, and there's some background here. This video was taken aboard Salem. It was in a room called the Wardroom Galley, which is aboard a big ship like Salem. Everybody has their own place to eat. The crew's mess is way back aft, and the officer's mess or the wardroom is up forward. And the wardroom has its own kitchen or galley. So this video was taken in the Wardroom Galley. And this particular day, and I'm not gonna get into it too deeply, but one of the ways things changed aboard the Salem was one of the other guys and I had good friends from the Navy die, and those guys came to the ship. So in this video was taken the day I found out that my submarine buddy, Jim Duffy, had passed away. And there are a couple of things I want you to pay attention to. The reason I like this video is that there's my old motion sensor is out in the passageway. You're gonna hear that go off at some point. There's a REM pod on the table, there's a Paralight on the table, you're gonna see both of those devices go. And there are personal experiences. Because what happens is, and when I say the device is going off, I get that it doesn't mean anything to you when you're watching it in the lights. The thing is the timing. We're asking questions and these things are going off in response to the questions. At one point, one of the women out in the hallway, Michelle Rosner, who's one of our gang, says, I got a headache. When whatever it was walked past her and the motion sensor in the passageway went off. And one of the other guests said, I did too. So what I think happens in this video is we're talking to one guy, but then somebody else leaves when we're talking about them. And I think he walks past two women who both get headaches when he walks by. And as he walks by and walks out the door and down the passageway, the motion sensor goes off. Oop. No. Well, I want it to start. So, Chief, Atchison. Good. Can you see it okay? No, it's there are some of us. Feel as though folks on the other side have the capability sometimes to know what's going on in our head. So I'm gonna ask you, you know who I lost today? Frank was? Nothing happens as a no. Forgot it, shit, but actually. Well. Oh. You're a part of all that.
So I think I was a roommate.
For the record, I never had a bunk mate. You just heard us talking. Okay. Wasn't there, when Michelle went again, she was scared away. You know, what's scaring her away? Oh. Your relationship with this other entity. Just kind of leave each other alone. Motion sensor.
I did not move. And I think he went right past me.
That's basically.
Because I had this tingling in my head.
And here we find that the guy we were talking to was still there, so it was someone else. Really? Oh, could be something on that. So was there someone else in here with us? Was that you? I didn't. Yeah, okay.
And that entity left.
All right, I'm gonna move on. But one of the things I love about that video, and I don't know how well you've heard it, but one of the great things about what we're doing on Salem, and when I said that I don't think anybody's doing the things we're doing, did you hear how casually the other guy speaking in this video, is Lou Calcagni, who's one of the gang. He and I are the two ex-Navy guys on the team. How casually Lou says, we're talking to an entity named the Chief. And how casually Lou says, earlier we were talking to Petty Officer O'Brien. Well, he's a spirit too. And when he says, Michelle was playing with Lucy back in the third mess. Lucy is a 7-year-old Greek girl who we think died in the earthquake in 1953. So these are all spirits. And you notice how casually we talk about, well, we were talking to this guy or we were talking to that guy. And that's basically what happened. So another piece of equipment I want to talk about is a camera called an SLS cam. I'm not gonna try to tell you what SLS stands for because I forget, to be honest with you. But what we're talking about basically is video game technology. We're talking about a radar emitter that is putting out infrared radar and that's bouncing back, and you have what amounts to an iPod monitor. And what you're seeing on the monitor is what's bouncing back to you. So what you see basically are stick figures. And I've never been a fan of SLS because they map everything. If you were to stand over there with an SLS, this would be indistinguishable because it would be mapping the microphone, it would be mapping this, it would be mapping that thing, it would be mapping everything. So it's kind of hard, but once in a while, something happens that kind of makes you say, wow. And this SLS video was taken in a 3rd floor bedroom in a place called the Emory Estate in Weymouth, Mass. There's a young boy named Tim, we think 9, who was killed in a carriage accident in front of the estate. And in this SLS video, you got 2 of the guys, Lou, Pat Connors, and myself. Those 2 guys are taking the video, and at some point, I'm gonna walk over and stand next to the figure to give it a little bit of contrast. You can't hear it. But as I said, I walk over and stand next to this figure. Obviously, I'm the only one who's actually there. But what's interesting is, as you're watching, Lou is talking to this small figure. And you can see the little boy is just kind of standing there. But at some point, what happens is, I say to him, you probably don't know this, but my little boy's name is Tim. And you can see how he suddenly gets under my arm and gets closer to me. At some point, they're gonna ask him to take my hand, which he very clearly does. I can hear it right here, but I don't know why. This is the last one that really has audio. Well, the other thing you're gonna see here is, as I'm standing there, of course, I couldn't see what they were seeing. And one of the guys said to me, hey, raise your arm. And I said, I can't. It's really heavy. And you're gonna see why. He takes my hand. And you can hear, you can't hear him high much, but you can hear Lou's pretty excited at this point. And at some point, he's hanging from my arm. So I'm trying to lift my arm. So there you go. Like I said, I've never been a fan of this technology, but it's really kind of unbelievable when you see something like that. So I love, we have some stuff that's kind of what I call old school. One of them are these. You have cats? Anybody have cats?
Oh, yeah.
So this is a cat toy, it's a cat ball. And I love these because, when one of these things goes off, it's easy for somebody to say, well, yeah, but maybe there was something in the wiring in the wall, or like the REM pods all go crazy. When we're on the ship, we have walkie-talkies, so we know where everybody is. And when somebody keys a walkie-talkie, the REM pods all go crazy. But not these bad boys. You've got to touch this thing. There's nothing makes this go. And we have a couple of videos of cat balls on the ship. These are both in the hospital on the ship. And I always make sure to say that these aren't our videos. These are videos that some other people sent us. The one on the left is an amazing group of deaf ghost hunters. I don't even know how they do what they do. They're called Silence Paranormal, and they're great. They come to the ship occasionally. It's always a pleasure to have them aboard. And the other one is taken by, of all the groups I know of, my favorite ghost hunting group name is Schrodinger's Ghost. And that's who took this video here. This is a little harder to see because you're standing at the end of a bunk in the hospital looking this way. You see the bottom of the pillow. And then what you see here is a tray, like to eat or to play solitaire or whatever the guy's at the hospital. The downside is that's gone. That'll never be used again. We're over here now. Yeah, that's a pretty good one. I kind of like that. So the other old school stuff I want to talk about though. And we all use, well, no, that's not really true, is it? We don't all. We have these dowsing rods that Amy was talking about. This box here is mine. Nobody touches my dowsing rods. But Sandra has her own now. You want to talk a little bit about them and
Well,
about the pendulum as well?
okay, well, basically, are you familiar with the dowsing rods at all? I know they used to use them to find water, a long time, or was that a stick? But they're free spinning. I mean, you can't control them because they're in a sheath. Okay, so the rod is a thin rod in the sheath, so you cannot control them, okay? So what you do is you say, is there anyone in the room that would like to talk to me? Can you point these away from me? Away. So there you go. Okay. And sometimes I say, can you turn these to the right for me? Oh. Can you bring them back to the center? And where's Don in the room? Can you bring them back to the center? So we use these to communicate. I seem to have some energies around me that follow me and they like to use these sticks. So are you somebody that I'm familiar with? That usually indicates yes. And have I spoken with you before? So this is a tool that we use, and I would say, can we say goodbye for right now? I always like to make sure we say goodbye. Same thing with the Ouija board. If you ever use a Ouija board, we have a pro on our team who, you have to say goodbye. Sometimes they don't want to say goodbye, but eventually they will. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with the pendulum at all. And, this one's a little bit trickier because you really need to keep your arm still. So I kind of like to just anchor it in and then hold it. And then I'll just start asking if they could start swinging this for me.
Wow.
Can you swing it higher? And then, can you bring it back to the center? You make a circle. So, I mean, so it does. It's the energies that are around me right now that are making these devices go off, but it is very useful in talking, because I'll ask them, can you exit so I can talk with someone else who might be in the room? And these are old school things that we use.
I love the pendulums, and I have one. I don't use it very often because I just don't think I'm steady enough to be effective, but I always say about the pendulum, what you just saw, whether you believe that it's doing what Sandra's telling you it's doing or not, it's pretty impressive when it's just sitting there and she says, can you start making it go? And all of a sudden it's going like this. And then she says, bring it back to the center, and it just kind of stops. I mean, you can think whatever the hell you want, but I don't know how you explain it.
Try to keep your arm, still, because, sometimes you feel like, even using these sometimes, you're holding them here, but you feel like you
Yeah.
want to move it, but you don't, you keep your arms pretty still so that it'll do it on its own.
Yep, and Amy was right. Sandra spoke to somebody
Yeah.
that was here earlier. Somebody that said they were attached to somebody in the
In
building,
the building, yeah.
but who wasn't in the room with us.
And then when this woman walked in, I said, can you point to the new, because I was standing over here. Can you point to the new person that walked in the room? And it went right to her. Wow.
Yeah, so I mean, they're pretty effective. It was nice to have that happen, because I was saying that when I do these alone, I bring mine, and I always end up talking to the same guy as a sailor that follows me around from Salem, and I always end up talking to him, so it was nice talking to somebody else for a change. Sorry, Robin. So, as Amy said, we've been all over the place, and these are just some of the places we've been. Some of them you've heard of, some of them you haven't. Lizzie Borden house, obviously, we spent the night there a couple of times. The Conjuring house, for those of you who saw the movie, the original movie, The Conjuring. The Conjuring house in Harrisburg, Rhode Island is the house where those events supposedly took place. We spent the night there a number of times. You see the Sallie House here. On that same weekend, we stayed at the Villisca Axe Murder House in Villisca, Iowa. We love our jails, Burlington County Prison in New Jersey, Mid-Orange Correctional Facility. I have a little audio from there.
You have a good idea.
Yeah, I have a good audio from there that I'll play you in a little while. Penhurst School, which was an asylum, really, more than anything else. I have a great video from Penhurst, but I don't bring it because it's very hard to hear. Penhurst is one of those places you see on TV that have the tunnels underneath. And I have a great video where we're down in one of the tunnels. Were you there?
Yeah.
I know you were at Penhurst, but we were down in the tunnels. And at one point, we followed a tunnel to the end. So that we literally got to a brick wall at the end of this tunnel. We turned and started coming back, and I don't think we got 20 yards, 30 yards. When clear as day, there was somebody coming from where we had just come. And I say video because that's what it is. You can't see anything because it's so dark, but you very clearly hear the footsteps walking towards us. Yeah, and there's nothing, there's a wall. We were just there.
I think Sallie House is kind of the most.
Well,
House I've been.
yeah, the Sallie House was, of all the places we've been, I'll say the Sallie House, maybe the only place I've ever been that clearly didn't want us there.
It was so funny when we go to these overnights, well, okay, I'm gonna be in this bedroom, I'm gonna be in this bedroom, end of the night, we're all in the same room.
We're all huddled in the living room, sleeping bags. Sandra talked about the Ouija board. We don't use one very often, but we do have a woman on our team, even Maggie, who we kind of call the Ouija queen. because she knows exactly what she's doing. There have been times when we've been using it and it seemed like everything was fine, and Eva would say, something's wrong, it's time to close. And she knows how to close it and back out safely, and leave it alone. We were down at Slater Mill down in Warwick, Rhode Island, doing a Ouija board session when the thing wouldn't leave. And the guy that runs the place, he was free, he was throwing holy water at it and all kinds of crazy shit. And he even just kept saying, "Would you relax?" And eventually, very calmly, got the thing to back away and say goodnight. That was the end of it. At the Sallie House, it said, "Kill you all."
That's probably where we all were in the same room.
Yeah, it said, "Your people leave now," is what it said first. And I said, "We're not going anywhere." It was about 3 o'clock in the morning and I said, "We're not going anyplace." And it said, "Kill you all." So anyway, this is some of the places we've been. As I said, we're headed up to the Revere Historical Society when we leave here tonight. Some pictures of us, Eastern States Penitentiary in Philadelphia. The Villisca Axe Murder House, that was a great trip. Penhurst, this is a house in Western New York. It's in Hinsdale, New York. It's called the Dandy House or the Hinsdale House, which aside from the Sallie House, aside from the Sallie House, maybe one of the most haunted places I've ever been. And the weird thing about it is, I don't know, how many times have you been to Hinsdale? Twice. I've been to Hinsdale 5 times now, and I just find myself drawn back there. I don't even know why that is. Do you want to talk about Hinsdale? Because you had something.
Well, but first you and I did at the table.
Yeah,
I know.
we did what we never do. Well, what happened, I talk about the Ouija Queen, this is Eva.
Yeah.
And one of the times we went there, Eva brought a little boy home with her. And of course, she complained about it, but I said to her afterwards, "You gotta be kidding me, you did everything but put a friggin' car seat in the car." I mean, she did everything but invite this kid to come home with her.
So she invited him back.
And she was fine, except for the fact that she's got 2 little boys, and it started to become a problem with her boys. Like the entity that was there seemed to get jealous of the attention her kids got, and it became an issue. So we went back to Hinsdale, and one of our goals was to bring that little boy back to Hinsdale. Which we did, and we sat around the kitchen table, and correct me, this was a while ago, so correct me if I go south. Sat around the kitchen table, and almost immediately, Amanda Cook, who is also a sensitive, and who seemingly gets stronger every goddamn day. All of a sudden, Amanda basically just fell apart.
Yeah.
She started crying and
We were all trying to talk to.
yeah, we were sitting around the kitchen table. Now, I talked about Lou Calcagni, and this is his wife, Michelle, who is also a very powerful sensitive. And Michelle told us that Cookie was this little boy's mother. And she was so happy that the little boy was back, but she was crying because he wouldn't go to her.
No.
He was afraid. And the way Michelle explained it was, he wasn't afraid of her,
Right.
his mother, he was afraid of somebody that was with her. A brother, a stepfather, somebody that was with her. But Michelle kept saying, "You gotta go, you gotta go," and I say it brusquely, she obviously was very gentle. "You gotta go, you gotta go." And all of a sudden, sitting at that table,
We broke
we broke the circle.
and something came flying.
I mean,
Energy just came flying through the 2 of us because we were sitting next to each other and I'm like, whoa.
it didn't knock us out of our chairs, but it was close. I mean, it was like a warm wind that hit the 2 of us. And it was like coming from Cook,
Mhm.
and it just kind of went straight across the table and literally rocked us back in our seats. It was unbelievable.
Same thing happened to me that evening when I was sleeping. It sounded like a freight train and all of a sudden something just went right through me. And I sat straight up and I was like, that scared the bejesus out of me.
Yeah.
And then I just laid back down and went back to sleep. I don't know how I did that. but-
Well, and it was one of those great things that it happened, and as soon as it happened, Michelle said, "He's gone." And it was one of those things
I think
where,
we went across.
you know, it was great. that we were able to bring, not only bring this kid back, but to reunite him with his mother was fabulous. You know, we don't do a lot of that kind of stuff. We avoid it a lot of the time, but we have done it on occasion. We've done it on the ship. And it's always a wonderful thing, you know, if these people wanna go, who the hell are we to keep them? You know what I mean? I hate the idea of doing it on the ship because we do a lot of business on the ship. And when I say do business, I wanna stress to you, everything we do aboard the ship, we do public investigations. Teams pay $800 to have the ship to themselves for an evening. All of that money goes to the ship. We don't make if you book the ship, you book it right through their website. We don't make a nickel.
We're volunteers.
Yeah, we don't make a nickel from the things we do on the ship. But we do a lot of business. We made the ship a lot of money. And we hate the idea of crossing entities over on the ship because it could kill business, basically. And, you know,
They wanna go.
business comes to an end, people start going to the Oliver House instead of the Salem. I end up having to find other ways to get the Christ out of the house, and it's a nightmare scenario, basically. So yeah, that's the Hinsdale House. The Emery Estate, as we discussed, this is the Sallie House.
That's not the funny picture.
That you saw, yeah, that's not the same. That was a great trip. That was a great trip, though. We had a good time. So Salem is our home away from home. This is where we spend the vast majority of our time. She is a heavy cruiser, hence the CA designation. She is the only heavy cruiser left in existence. She had two sister ships, the Des Moines and the Newport News, both of which are razor blades, some other useful things made of steel, but are gone. Both were in service longer than Sam, but both are long gone. She is in Quincy, Mass at the Fore River Shipyard. She sits now about 75 yards from the slip where her keel was laid. So when she came back to Quincy in '93, she basically came home. She was only in service for 10 years, 1949 to 1959, which is a very short period of time for a Navy ship, but I think that, you know, she was built just after the war. And the thought process was these kind of ships were gonna dominate, battleships were going away. At this point, there were no more battleships, they brought a couple back later. But there weren't any, so come 1959, Salem and her sisters were the biggest ships, other than aircraft carriers, the biggest Navy ships in the world. Her 8-inch guns were the biggest ship-mounted guns on Earth. She never saw any combat during her time. And I often tell people that if there is another Navy ship that never saw combat, but saw as much death as she did, I would like to hear about it, because I don't believe it exists. 1953, she was in the Mediterranean, and there was a very bad earthquake on one of the Ionian Islands off the coast of Greece. And because she just happened to be there, she was basically the hospital. She was only there about 3 days, but the estimate that is about 1,700 people were brought aboard Salem for treatment during that period of time. And it's estimated that about 85 people died aboard the ship. Along with 10 to 12 babies born aboard the ship. As soon as she was only there 3 or 4 days, as I said, you know, she wasn't meant for that. She didn't have medical supplies or food or even fresh water to sustain that mission, really, for any period of time. So 3 or 4 days later, she came back to Boston, which was her home port. She was only here 2 days when a light aircraft carrier, USS Lady, had a catapult explosion. And 14 guys from the Lady were brought aboard Salem for treatment, 7 of which died aboard the ship.
When was that?
1953. The Lady, I believe, was, 1953.
And it was Boston, not Rhode Island.
No, Boston.
Thank you.
In 1956, when she was headed back across the Atlantic, she was gonna stop in France on the way to the Med. She was steaming with a destroyer, John R. Pierce. Pierce was doing an anti-aircraft drill. And my understanding is they stopped the drill for some reason, and when they restarted, they loaded a gun that was already loaded. Needless to say, that was a problem. When that mount exploded, one guy was killed outright, and 7 guys from Pierce were brought aboard Salem for treatment. 3 of those guys, we think 3, the story is 4, but we know 3 died aboard Salem. And along with several crew accidents over the course of her 10-year life, we estimate there have been about 100 deaths aboard Salem, including one volunteer who had a heart attack and died aboard the ship after she got back to Quincy in 1993. So when we first started, and Sandra hasn't been there as long, I've been aboard the ship on and off, but mostly on, for nearly 20 years now. And when we first started investigating aboard the ship, we spoke to Greek civilians. And I guess I'll short circuit the question now and say that we learned a long time ago that the veil of death apparently takes care of the language issue, because we've never had any problems communicating with the Greek civilians who were aboard the ship. We spoke very regularly to a young man named Nico, and that was primarily with dowsing rods. It was always great to talk to him because he always came forward right away and seemed to enjoy speaking to us, but I, for one, always felt horrid after I spoke to him because he was looking for his wife and son. So afterwards, you just always felt terrible. There was nothing you could do for this. Nico is gone. And I've chosen to believe that he found his family in a way he went. I don't know whether that's really what happened or not, but it's what I've chosen to believe, and it's what I'm saying. A young girl, 7-year-old girl named Lucy, and her family, her mother and father, are still aboard the ship. You heard in the video when we were talking to the chief, you heard Lou refer to Michelle playing with Lucy back in the 3rd mess. They played Ring Around the Rosie. And it turns out Lucy and her family are Italian. They were in Greece, but they were not Greek, they were Italian. Lucy speaks to us with instruments normally. Her mother speaks to us with dowsing rods primarily. And it's become kind of a running joke that whenever I speak to Lucy's mother, I always ask, is your husband here? And she always says yes. And I always ask to talk to him, and she always says no. And then there are a number of children, or we don't speak to them very often now, but there used to be a number of children down in the berthing areas of the ship, and something I talk about more when I do a more Salem-centric presentation. A lot of the work we're doing now and have done has to do with the entities and their relationships between each other. And our first experience in that regard was there's a dog aboard the ship. Nobody's ever seen the dog, but we have a lot of audio of the dog. And the chief, who we now know well, way back, 15 years ago, he was an angry guy back aft. Nobody knew who he was. He was just this angry sailor back aft. And the dog seemed to be down in the berthing area with the kids. And we began to theorize at some point that the reason the dog was in the berthing area with the kids was because the dog was worried about the angry guy right on the deck above and wanted to protect the kids. And while we never really bore that specific idea out, it is what led us down the road to start wondering about the entities aboard the ship and how they dealt with each other and how they communicated with each other. I talk about the chief. He was the constant. He was the one that was there from the very beginning. As I said, we didn't know his name. He was just the chief. He served aboard Salem 1956, 1957. He was a chief commissary-man. The damn cooks in the Navy, they change what they call themselves every few years. And at that point in time, they were commissary-men. When I was aboard, they were mess specialists. Before commissary-men, they were stewards. So they change it all the time. I don't even know what they're called now. But he was a chief cook in any event. The chief did not die aboard the ship. And we think the chief considers himself the guardian of Salem. When you act the fool aboard Salem, when you disrespect the chief of the ship, he is the one that you will answer to. This video, so we're starting to have a lot of YouTube guys now come aboard. And I don't know about anybody else, but I never, I mean, I'm 64 years old. The first guy, Elton Castile, called me and said, I'm a YouTuber. Honestly, the first thing I thought was, well, your parents must just be over the friggin' moon. Then he pulled up in his Ferrari and I realized his parents were probably over the moon in their mansion in Santo Domingo or someplace. So Elton and his crew came aboard. And I'm gonna stress now, they were great. Elton he's a great guy. He really is. They're all mental. The whole bunch of them are all crazy. But he's a very, very nice guy. And makes a bundle and has treated us very, very well when he's come aboard the ship, financially treated us very, very well. The first night they came, as soon as they walked up the gangway, one of his guys started climbing the 8-inch gun turrets up forward. And when he came down, he had this big gash over his eye. And Elton said, what happened to you? He said, I don't know, man. He said, I was climbing, I was fine. He said, I think I smashed my own face against the gun. Well, that's not what happened at all. I think the chief was letting him know that it was time to get down from the gun. And they spent the whole night getting pushed, shoved. At one point, one of the guys said he was sure if he hadn't had a tighter grip, he'd have gone down the ladder because he was pushed from behind. One of the things they did was they went into a closet back aft and got out a bunch of old Halloween stuff. And the chief hates Halloween. They used to do a haunted house aboard the ship, and they ended up having to pull the plug because the chief made it so difficult for them. At the end, fires were lighting all over the ship and they couldn't figure out where it was coming from. So they ended up just pulling the plug. So anyway, when those guys, Elton's guys, that first night, when they left the ship, one of them stood on the pier, turned around and took a picture of the ship. And this is the picture he took. And as you can see, it's circled here, but you can see it, the original there. This shadow's gotta be 10 feet tall, anyway. And we spent a whole night trying to take this picture. Standing all at different spots on the pier, piling stuff up and standing on it to try to get to the height. We spent a whole night trying to take this picture and we couldn't do it. And frankly, I think this is the chief making sure those guys left his ship because he was very unhappy with them while they were there. I want to stress, as we talk about, well, let's see where I go. So I want to stress that, like the chief, I say we didn't know his name for years and years and years. This is part of where we've gone, okay? These are whiteboards that are in my office on the ship. These are guys that we talk to pretty much every weekend. As I said in the video you watched, you heard Lou talking about Petty Officer O'Brien just like it was nothing. And as you can see, Petty Officer Frank O'Brien, she just made 3rd class Frank O'Brien. When you see verified in red next to their names, what that means is we know these guys. We know they were aboard the ship those years. We have pictures of them. These books are, when a ship like Salem, a big ship like that goes on a deployment, when they get home, they issue a book. It's kind of like a high school yearbook, basically. And it's called a cruise book. And it's got pictures of port calls and pictures of all the guys and divisions. But the good thing is in the back of most of them, there's a straight alphabetical listing of the crew. And that's been a tremendous tool for us. And O'Brien is the best example because it was slow but sure that we got to where we are now with him. You go in the hospital initially, and is somebody here? And everything's going on. So we know somebody's in. We're asking yes or no questions. Are you a sailor? Yes. Are you from this ship? Yes. So we know now we're talking to a sailor from the Salem. When were you aboard the ship? And of course, the way to do that is were you aboard the ship before 1955? No. Okay, so were you aboard in 55? Yes. 56? Yes. 57? No. So we know he was aboard in 55 and 56. That doesn't bring us to the book yet, because we still don't know who we're talking to. We just know we're talking to a guy from the ship who was aboard in 55, 56. And I guess I want to stop for a second and say something. When I say the word no, K-N-O-W, I understand that technically we don't know any of this. And frankly, anybody who does what we do, who tells you that they know, that's the best way to know that they're full of it. Because we don't. Eventually, we'll all find out. But for the moment, when I use the word no, when I say we know, what I mean by that is, I'm confident that we've done the kind of due diligence it takes to make a solid deduction. That's what I'm saying. And I have no problem making that clear. So this is what we know. So then, what happens next, Sandra?
Well, I think one of the medians said the last name was O'Brien.
The first, we had a medium aboard during a Paracon, right? And very nonchalantly said, hey, you know, the guy in the hospital, his name's O'Brien. And it was kind of like, excuse me? And she said, yeah, that guy. See, I was trying to give you credit for the,
Well, I do, I mean,
well, what happened?
so, well, during the Paracon, I was sitting in the ward room and somebody was talking to me. I mean, it's like in my head, you know, of course, sometimes I have to second guess myself, which I shouldn't, but he just started saying, I said, his name was Frank, I'm like, but he doesn't like to be called, no, his name was Francis. He didn't like to be called Francis. He liked to be called Frank. And I had no idea what this was all about, but then we started talking later in text, and then somebody had mentioned O'Brien, and I said, by any chance is his first name Francis? And that's how we got to.
Yeah, so now, what we think, we're talking to a guy named Frank O'Brien, who was aboard Salem 55, 56.
Yeah.
So I go to the 1956 cruise book, and sure enough, who do I find in the back? Machinist mate, third class, Frank O'Brien. Now, we don't just go in the hospital and say, hey, are you Frank O'Brien? What we'll do is we'll go in and we'll say, and this is a day, you know, as it's one of those things, been doing this as long as I've been doing it, there are certain things you'll never forget. And I will always remember going in the hospital and saying, are you here? And he said, yes. And I can remember saying, I think we know who you are. And everything in the room just went wild. I mean, you could feel the elation in the room. The idea that we knew who he was, this guy was just beside himself. So I said, and we know that your name begins with an F. And everything lit up. And I said, excellent. So we know your name is Fred. The same way you could feel the elation before you could feel the disappointment then. And I said, no. I said, we know that your name is Frank, and everything went crazy. So that's how we get to Frank O'Brien. And then I said, and not only that, but we know you were we know you were a quartermaster aboard the ship. And nothing happened. And I say, no, you know that we're just screwing with you. We know you were a machinist mate, and everything goes crazy. So again, do we know? No, but I think we did a pretty good job of running it down. So now we're talking a machinist mate, third class, Frank O'Brien. And one of the great things about Frank, and the reason he's such a great example, one of the guys from the Pierce was a gunner's mate named Ralph Malott. And Ralph Malott, as you walked into the hospital aboard Salem, was in the first bottom rack on the right as you walked in. He wasn't very communicative. He didn't really say much, but he was there. And Frank O'Brien was always right there. Never moved. No idea why that was. They were never on the same ship together, But then, using newspapers.com, eventually, I found Ralph Malot's obituary. And using that obituary, I found that he and Frank O'Brien graduated from Wilmington, North Carolina High School together. So what we think happened was, Malott came aboard the ship injured from the Pierce. And O'Brien found that his friend was there in the hospital and rushed to the hospital to be there with him. The good news is Malott is gone. And the great thing about that is that now Frank's all over the ship. We talked to him in the wardroom, we talked to him back in the third mess, whereas he never left the hospital before. So anyway, I have another presentation that's all about the Salem. But this is, when I say nobody's doing this kind of work, I mean, this is what we're doing. And we're finding new things. You know, seemingly every couple of weeks, we stumble across something new that leads us in another direction. Let's find out exactly what the hell is going on. As I said, I told Amy, one of these days I'll come back and give that, because it's pretty good. So we have evidence from the Salem. Sometimes it's, you know, these particular, they're photographs, but they're just audio.
Like us investigating your ship?
That's the old standby. Everybody who's ever investigated has a get out or a don't investigate here or. This one is a little bit different. So this photograph is not the surgery aboard the ship. It's the surgical dressing room. But the audio you're about to hear comes from in front of the surgery. Surgery has a piece of plexiglass bolted to the door, because during the regular tours, they don't like people going in there. There's a lot of little things in there that frankly have a tendency to grow legs when guests can walk around them. But there's a door in the back. You see this swinging door here. I have a key to a door in the back that gets us into this room and the surgery. So we investigated. This particular night, there were 3 of us aboard the ship. Pat Connors, myself, and a woman who shall remain nameless. No. And we were talking about, I didn't have my keys. That was the problem. I had forgotten my keys. And they were arguing about who was gonna climb over the plexiglass, and I kept saying I could jimmy the door if they would just give me a minute. Finally, the woman says that when she gets in there, she's gonna climb up on the table, put her feet in the stirrups, and record for a little while and see what happens. And you're gonna hear a little girl's voice. I'll tell you now, it's very fast, but I'll play it a couple of times. When you hear it, it's very clear. And think about what I just told you we were talking about when you try to figure out what she says.
This is the surgical area.
You hear
This is the surgical area.
I think she's saying, how would you get there? I think she was reminding us that we hadn't figured out how we were gonna get in the damn room yet. So it was kind of stupid to talk about what we were gonna do when we got there.
This is the surgical area.
Sounds like that.
So this is the one Sandra was talking about. This is from Mid-Orange Correctional. So the background here is that I was in very bad shape. I had had some knee problems, and I was using a walker when we went there. The only reason I even went was because these people had postponed this thing twice because of my knee. So this time I said, no, I'm fine. We shouldn't cancel. We gotta go. And I was miserable. I was using a walker. I popped some stitches. It was terrible. So at the end, we set up kind of home base in this auditorium. And that's what you see here. This is the stage. So at the end of the night, they all said they were gonna go up to the 5th floor of this building. Well, clearly I wasn't gonna do that. So I said, that's cool. You guys go ahead. because I think I hear something on the stage. So you guys go ahead and I said, just turn off the lights. So they turned off the lights, they went upstairs and they left me in this room alone. What's that? No. Play something that I can't afford to say. I mean, I'm gonna hear it now, but I can play it back. You can't hear it. It's not loud enough. Did you hear
Oh, you going to corners or something?
it? No, he says walking.
Surprised you can't hear it, it's pretty loud.
Yeah, the one video was pretty loud. I don't know why this one isn't. That's too bad. Yeah, you know, I'm saying, I hear you, I won't hear you, but I'll record it. And then I played it like right away, and very clearly he said walking. You go to our page, we have cards up here. If you go to our Facebook page, all this stuff is on our Facebook page. So then we have some photographs. I love this one. Remember this day?
Yes,
So we were in the office and Sandra kept saying, somebody crying.
I heard some a lady crying.
There's a woman crying down the hall. I can hear her. Have you ever spent any time with a psychic, with a sensitive? It's not always easy. Cause it's always something. Anyway, there was a guest came and took a picture. This is the surgeon. And I love this picture for a reason that you may not see until I point it out. Not only does it look like someone is laying on the table here, but it looks to me like there are people standing around the table.
Oh, yeah, yes.
It looks to me like there are people standing around the surgical table as well. And then this was actually the crazy lighter because it was on one of the Halloween things. And one of the guests who was leaving turned around and took this picture, which I thought was kind of neat. So, I don't know how well you can see it. This picture is what I consider a once in a lifetime capture. And I talk about the Facebook pages. If you go to USS Salem Paranormal Experience on Facebook, there's this picture is there and you get a much better look at it. This is in the hospital. And on this particular night, this woman in orange kept saying, there's somebody behind me. I know there's somebody behind me. I can feel it. And then at some point, this kid on the other side said, somebody just bumped into my shoulder. And this picture was taken at the time. There's nobody standing between those two people. This individual, he's not there. And I'm telling you right now, I was there. I looked up. There was nobody there. That apparition is so solid that the reflection you see behind him is a water. And his shoulder is blocking it out. Like I said, if you go to Facebook, you'll get a much better look at this picture. It is what I consider to be a once in a lifetime. So, last but not least, I talked about the Conjuring. The family that those things supposedly happened to were the parents, the parenting. The second to oldest daughter, Andrea, is a good friend. We interviewed her for a week. We had it briefly at a cable TV show. We interviewed her. She's a wonderful, and I'm going to stress, she is a wonderful, wonderful woman. By the same token, the first guy that used the expression out there, he was talking about Andrea. Because she is out there. She left ghosts in the rear view a very, very long time ago. And is firmly in the extraterrestrial camp now. And I say that literally. I think she is literally in the extraterrestrial camp. So she came to the ship a while back, and what happened was right before she came, she had a hip thing and couldn't get below. And she said to me, that's fine. There's plenty going on up here. I said, sayonara, and down below I went. Well, then she sent me these pictures. And I mean, you see this first picture, you see these little dots, right? Like dots. And now they're camped over this building. And I hate to date myself, but back when the shipyard was open, that's the building I worked in. So you see the triangle with this little light between them, right? And then it starts moving around. They stay in the same position, they still have that little light bar between them. And they're all over the place. I said to Andrea, what the hell is this? She said, haven't you ever seen it? It happens every night. And I said, mother of God, you gotta be kidding me. So our plan was, last Halloween, we have a Halloween event aboard the ship. It's not a haunted house thing, it's basically an investigation in costumes. And by the way, it's on a Saturday night, and usually Wednesday or Thursday, we go to the ship and talk to the chief and make sure he knows that it's coming, and that it's us, and make sure he's cool. But the plan this past year was, we were gonna have a sky watch back on the fantail. The guy bailed at the last minute. But that was the plan. We're gonna try it again this coming year and have a sky watch and see what happens. So that's all I've got for you. I ran late, I apologize.